There isn't a surf town on Earth that's exploded as quickly. Crazy development happens all over Bali, but this particular part of the island is unrivaled in just how rapidly the area has grown. So in this video, we're exploring why. How has this stretch of Balinese coast changed from this to this in just a few years? In the 80s and 90s, Canggu was, well, not a lot really. There was nothing there. No one stayed in Canggu because there was simply nowhere to stay. And the only people who did visit were inquisitive surfers looking to escape Kuta. While the breaks of Echo Beach and Old Man's were likely surfed before, it wasn't really until the 90s that anyone ventured north of Kuta to surf in Canggu. It just wasn't a thing. Canggu back then was a world away from what we know it as today. Just a small Balinese village surrounded by rice paddies, temples, coconut groves and small family farms. Surfers who ventured there were met with small potholed dirt roads, herds of cows crossing the roads, chickens and dogs running out into the road. You know, it was a proper rural Balinese village. But back then, if you made just the short drive north of Kuta, you were rewarded with empty waves. For longboarders, it was Batu Belong, which is now commonly known as Old Man's. You know, very fun, mellow, rolling peaks. And just next door was the shortboard option, where you had a left reef, a right reef, and a punchy sandbar wedge slap bang in the middle of it. There were few people surfing there, and eventually a small handful of warungs selling coconuts and bintangs popped up along the beach. But for a few years, it remained extremely rural. There were no beach clubs, no yoga retreats, and certainly nobody selling freaking NFTs in cafes and that kind of stuff. So through the early noughties, the town grew very steadily. You know, it was still a sleepy surf town. There wasn't much going on. But the real turning point came in the early 2010s. And it was a combination of factors that sent the growth of Canggu into overdrive, and then some. As more surfers came to Bali to surf the famous breaks of Kuta and eventually Uluwatu, more began to explore further and caught wind of the waves on offer in Canggu. The waves in Canggu were significantly easier to surf than the breaks found on the Bukit, you know, less reef breaks, mellower, so for more beginner, intermediate surfers, it was just a more attractive option. And the appealing nature of the breaks in the Canggu area just, you know, paved the way for a new market to cater to this demand of new tourists. More and more people started to come, and so the town began to accommodate that, and surf-orientated accommodations and hostels and camps began to spring up. Board rentals and surf schools and all these little beach shack type businesses started to spring up to meet this new demand. At first, land prices were also low, and this drew foreign investors and developers who began to build villas, resorts and restaurants. And as the money started to flow into the area, roads became slightly better, utilities became more readily available, and access from the airport was made easier. All of these things fueled the growth, and compared to Seminyak and Ubud, land in Canggu was still relatively cheap. Both local and foreign investors developed villas, resorts and restaurants quickly to capitalize on the rising demand, and many of the surrounding rice fields, of which the area had become synonymous, were sold off, transforming the landscape from this peaceful, rice paddy, dreamy Balinese coastline into a denser, more urban cluster. Social media also played a role, promoting Canggu as a hip destination, creating sudden spikes in demand for accommodation and amenities. The rise of remote work and Bali's global reputation as a creative hub attracted digital nomads, and with its reliable Wi-Fi and the emergence of co-work spaces, it became a base for location-independent professionals. It also had its party scene, you know, Canggu's very famous party scene, so for backpackers and anyone who's traveling in Bali, not just surfers, you know, sort of descend into Canggu and you get this crazy mix of like international backpackers, surfers, people just coming from all over the world to party, get laid, do all that kind of fun stuff. And yeah, the town just snowballed from there. Basically, you had this crazy party scene with bars, restaurants, clubs opening up all over the place. So all these businesses began to cater to this crazy demand of all different types of people coming to the town. When Indonesia's borders reopened, the floodgates opened. And then people didn't just come to visit, they came to stay. With the newfound lifestyle, Canggu had everything that everyone wanted. The population of foreigners living in Canggu doubled in 2 years. Stylish cafes with rice field backdrops, yoga studios, more luxury villas, beach clubs, tattoo parlors, CrossFit gyms and trendy co-work cafes sprang up all over the place, and Canggu just expanded and expanded. Government investment in Canggu specific infrastructure began more heavily around 2022 to 23. Local road improvements were made, including the iconic Canggu shortcut, which transformed from this, to the point of unrecognition. And by 2025, larger initiatives were underway, including the West Gatsu Street Extension and Underpass project, alongside upgrades to sidewalks, drainage and utilities on streets like Jalan Padang. If you've been there in the last couple of years, you'll have seen these infrastructure upgrades happening firsthand. They're making more sidewalks now, bringing cables underground and just making it a bit more legitimate, basically. And while it's still far from perfect, there's still traffic, there's still many issues regarding the rapid population growth and having the right infrastructure to meet it. Canggu has become so accessible and so easy to live in, it's just attracted even more people to the town. Bali's visa policies, such as the offering of social visas, business visas, and now digital nomad friendly policies, have also encouraged people to stay for a lot longer. Kuta and Seminyak to the south were already hotspots for higher end tourism on the island, and so it was inevitable that as demand grew, this would expand and eventually spill over into Canggu. To me, it now seems like Kuta, Seminyak and Canggu are all just joined together. When you're driving between them, you don't really go through any empty land. It's all just one thing. So it's all just becoming Kuta. The rapid development was also supported by local economic shifts and government policies. Many locals transitioned from rice farming jobs to ones in hospitality and construction, providing a ready labour force. And looser zoning regulations in Canggu, compared to other parts of Bali, also allowed developers to build quickly. And while the combination of Balinese cultural appeal and modern amenities made the area highly attractive. Now overall, Canggu's rapid transformation has been driven by a combination of all of these factors. Obviously with that comes very crowded lineups in the surf, whether you're surfing Old Man's or Echo. Every morning, you're surfing with a hell of a lot of people. So it's one of those places where you just have to get stuck in and get amongst it, accept the madness for what it is. But if you don't like crowds, it's definitely not a good place to go. Although that said, if it gets a little bit bigger and it's out of people's comfort zone, you can actually surf in Canggu with nobody out. Now, the main problem with this rapid growth is that the population and popularity of the place has grown so quickly and so significantly, it's outpaced the growth of the infrastructure. Roads built for village traffic are now jammed with cars and scooters. Rice fields are being replaced by villas and beach clubs, and Bali's limited waste management system struggles with the surge in trash and sewage. Combined with overdevelopment and heavy vehicle use, this has led to traffic, emissions and pollution, while the area's cultural landscape shifts from a quiet farming village to a busy commercial hub. One of the main problems in Canggu is the waste and pollution management. The surge of villas and restaurants and clubs generates huge amounts of trash, much of which isn't properly collected or recycled. Instead, it often ends up in illegal dump sites, is burned in open fires that release toxic fumes, or is just flushed into the rivers and eventually ends up in the lineup at Canggu's surf spots. And this is particularly prevalent in wet season. If you've ever surfed there in wet season, you'll know firsthand just how gnarly and horrible it is to surf sometimes. Plastic waste from single-use packaging is also a major contributor, leaving the beaches littered with plastic bottles and all sorts of trash. You only have to walk down Echo Beach on a rainy season morning and just to see sort of how horrific it is. At the same time, Canggu's rapid construction boom places heavy demands on groundwater, which supplies most of Bali's fresh water. Luxury villas, pools and landscape properties consume far more than the local ecosystem can sustainably provide, leading to falling water tables, saltwater intrusion and increasing pressure on local communities who struggle to access clean water. Today, Canggu has changed to the point of unrecognition. You know, if you've been there a few years ago and then go back today, you won't actually recognize where things are because it's changed so much. I remember, I think I first went there in 2015, and obviously it was quite built up then, but even the difference from 2015 compared to, I think I went back in 2018, 2019, so just 3 or 4 years later, I was genuinely shocked at how many more villas there were and cafes and how much it had spread out, and it was just mad. I mean, if you were there in the early 80s or 90s when there was nothing there, it must be pretty crazy to see how it is today. You know, it's a place that does feel suffocating sometimes if you're right in the thick of it all the time. It's a pretty mad place. That said, I see why, you know, I see why it has become like that, because I don't think there's anywhere else in the world you can live that well, that affordably. It just has everything you could ever want in terms of food, cafes, amenities, somewhere to stay for every budget. You've got very fun, very consistent waves for all abilities. It does just have everything, but then the downside to that is because it does have everything everyone wants. You've got traffic and pollution, crowded lineups, and it's just got this general hectic, like festival-like atmosphere. So if that doesn't sound like you, it's probably not the place for you. Otherwise, you just have to get stuck into the madness.